Community Keepers is an organization that provides therapeutic counseling and hosts life-changing workshops for learners, educators, and parents at 29 partner schools in marginalized communities. Amanda van der Vyver, who's an educational psychologist at Community Keepers, has written a thought-provoking article on how to build resilience and self-efficacy within children. You can find the article on socialtv.co.za or in our weekly newsletter. You're listening to our social newscast with me, Sam Marshall, brought to you by socialtv.co.za. Amanda, thank you very much for your time. Interesting thought leadership piece. Question is really, how do we raise children with resilience? How do we understand that word resilience? What does it mean in the context of raising a child?
Sam, I think the most important way to understand it is that it's the ability to bounce back, right? We know that we can't protect our children from harmful situations. Always things happen in the world that we can't control. And therefore, we need to have children that when something happens to them, they can bounce back. You know, that we can't keep them from being hurt, but if we can help them to bounce back, to recover quicker, to carry on after something happened to them, after they experience trauma, I think that will be really helpful for these kids.
Just bearing in mind, Amanda, that as a member of Community Keepers, you guys are working in vulnerable communities. You sometimes see the best of the best, children with amazing resilience, being able to bounce back from very traumatic situations. How have you, in the context of the work that you do with Community Keepers at 29 schools, how do you see that word resilience play out in extreme situations?
I think you're right. We're not working with kids who have a lot of resources, but when we have kids who have families who care and families who love them, or friends or teachers that support them, I think that is the golden moment when we see kids who have experienced trauma, but they are able to come and knock on our doors and say, Miss, I need to speak to somebody because something happened, or they say, oh yes, I really trust my mom, or I really trust my parents or my grandparents, or I have friends that I can talk to. I think, when kids have those resources, that doesn't cost anything. It just takes adults and people to be available for these kids. And I think that is the resources we also try to work on, and to encourage kids to make use of those resources, and to encourage parents to be those resources that kids can have, whether they have money or not, whether there's a lot of food in the house or not. If they have that encouragement from parents and somebody that they trust, so they have a safe space to go to, that really, really helps them.
I'm based in Johannesburg, you're based in Cape Town, and we're having this conversation, and I'm trying to imagine what life is like for a child at the moment that comes from a very impoverished background and has got to deal with so much. One of the things that you talk about in your article goes a little bit further than resilience, though. It talks about self-efficacy. And you say often we talk about resilience, which we've started this conversation about what is resilience and how does resilience impact the children that you're dealing with at a community level. But talk to me about self-efficacy as a progression of that conversation. What is it?
Yes. So self-efficacy is when a child knows they can do something about the situation. So they know if they can try, they can persevere, they can tackle their challenges, right? So, and if we teach children that they have a responsibility to also look after themselves, and that they have the skills to look after themselves, then that is also helpful. So then it's easier to bounce back because they know that they are capable of bouncing back. And I think what is so valuable about teaching kids self-efficacy or empowering them to develop self-efficacy is then they turn into adults that have self-efficacy. So we have adults who don't just blame outside factors for where they are in the situation, but that they know, okay, I can't control everything, but I can control some things, and I'm capable. So it's about the belief in a capability that a child has to have some control over the situation.
you unpack this idea of Charlie as the central theme
Yes,
construct of your thought leadership piece, and then you obviously take us through these critical points of resilience, self-efficacy, and also the kind of relationships around the so-called Charlie character. How important is relationships in the concepts of self-resilience and self-efficacy? That relationship could be, and to your point, could be supportive parents,
mm,
and then having the supporting structure of community keepers and the role that you play
mm,
at a school level. Could that
yes.
relationship work? And maybe it's a two-pronged question. Could the relationship work if there was no support structure at home and the only support structure was at school? How does resilience and self-efficacy then play out?
Sure, that's a big question because I think let me first say this. I think the important part of the relationship play in something like resilience and building resilience and self efficacy is the feedback that a child can receive, right? So a child goes home and he's improved his math marks and mom can say, "Oh wow, I'm proud of you. Do you see, because you studied harder, you got better marks," right? And immediately this child learned that, okay, I did something, I tried, I succeeded, and somebody's proud of me. Now, and to answer your second part of your question, if that doesn't happen at home, yes, there can be other role players, other relationships that also give that feedback, that positive feedback to a child. A teacher that's invested, a therapist like we do at Community Keepers, where we can give them that feedback, we can listen to their stories. But I can only see a child once a week. A teacher has 30 or 40 kids in their class, and it's difficult to give that constant feedback. So when that is absent at home, it's not as often as it should be. So yes, other people can play that part, but when it's somebody that is a constant in the child's life and it's repeated more and more times, the effect of it will be so much, significantly more.
I don't know if it's a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it. Can you build resilience in an older person? And I mean the person and that self-efficacy, because we'll talk about some of the tips. And I know that as community keepers, it's a big part of what you do at community level. But if a child has missed that process period, that engagement with community keepers or a reassuring force at home, can they get or learn or find resilience later on?
Yeah, I don't think it's a stupid question at all. I think yes, that's very important to know that maybe it will be harder for an older learner to learn that, or even for an adult to learn that because we go on the default of how we've grown up, how we were raised, and we have certain beliefs about our abilities, and if we were taught for years that we can't do something, or the world is just bad and we have no control over it, easy to stick to those beliefs, and our beliefs go into our actions and our emotions. But I do think if somebody is very persistent and consciously work to install those things even in an older child, to say, okay, wait, I know you think that you can't, I know that you think that now it's the end of the world because you failed the test. Let me tell you, it's not true. And to try and build those aspects of resilience and self-efficacy even into an older child is very important. Yes, I believe it is possible to do that. It may take some more intervention, and consistent intervention into that.
Final question, Amanda. There are some obviously practical on how to build self-efficacy within children, or the building blocks for resilience. In your article, you talk about creating opportunities for mastering, knowing your
Yeah.
child's strength. My question really is not really about the tips. It's about these things, yet again, comes back to something that I talked about a little bit earlier, the nature of relationships, the nature of
Mm,
the adult intervention. Can
mm.
anybody do this? Do you have to be self-aware as an adult that you're playing an important role in the building blocks for a child? Or is this things that you might have to go and learn?
I think anybody can do it, but I agree with you. It's important to know that you have this influence in a child's life. I think we forget that sometimes in general, right? We live our lives and it's so fast and we have so much things going on and we have our own like experiences of stress and anxiety and like just getting by, and then we forget that if we sit and we consciously and with intention interact with other people, that we could have this influence. So I think a first step is just to be aware of that, to be aware of if you intentionally interact with your child, to know them, to see their strengths, to comment on it, to interact, to communicate. I think, like small things, asking them, tell me about your day. Tell me like what went well today, what went wrong, what did you struggle with today, and just unpacking that. And we're not saying that you have to spend hours and hours. It's a 5 minute question, but it's that intent of realizing if I interact with my child, if I ask them these questions, if I notice these things and comment on it, I can influence them to go into the world and to be more resilient and to believe in themselves and to take on the world, and then be adults themselves at the end that can do this and pay this forward.
It's a beautiful thought leadership piece that you've put together. And I think anybody worth their salt who reflects on these things are going to take some beautiful nuggets out of it. They're going to look at some of the content. They're going to be self-critical, self-aware, especially if they're playing in this space. And I said it was a final question, but more of a thought, and just maybe to get a feedback from you. Amanda, you've been in a position where you have played in this space pre-COVID and you're now in the thick of it on a daily basis. Has this issue of resilience amongst children become harder? Are you seeing children struggling?
Mm. Yes, for sure. It's people are struggling, kids are struggling. We see it in a couple of forms. We see in our primary schools that there are more like school refusals, so kids who don't want to come to school, who are more intend to like stay at home, and they are scared of going to school because the rhythm has changed and the consistency is not there anymore. Most of our schools are not back full time. I know some of the schools in the more privileged areas, they have been back full time since beginning of the year or at some point during this time. Our schools are still skipping days, and that has had an impact. So I think, and we see that in the primary schools, in the high schools, we see that learners are really struggling. They are overwhelmed with the workload, catching up on what they've missed out on last year. Again, only being at school every second day. So we see a lot of anxiety. We see a lot of, kids feeling overwhelmed. And then I think, it's tough because this pandemic has impacted us all, right? And so parents have less resilience and energy to support their kids, maybe, or parents have lost their jobs, so there's a different level of anxiety in their house, and that also plays in. Teachers are really struggling because they have to catch up on last year's work, and they have the pressure of getting by, and also being worried about their own health and their own things going on at home. So that it's tough for them to bring all of that energy. So there's a lot more anxiety, and social and emotional stress going around. And and I definitely think our kids are feeling it. And it's almost like there's not time to build resilience or to look into those kind of aspects, because we have to focus on getting by, and just surviving this another year, right, of lockdown and the pandemic.